Morning, everyone. This is Martin, Francis, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. Today is Friday, March 7th, 2025. This is our office hours Q&A section where we take questions proposed by you and answer them. The process is pretty simple. You guys follow the link that Francis puts in one of the videos about
It's in the video description.
In the video description. Martin, I don't know. I still don't know the process, but I know that Martin eventually answers the questions, and I add color. Martin is usually right, but of course I have to tease him a little bit. That's just part of the ritual here. So and then we discuss them a little bit. We usually get through 5 or 6, but we got through quite a few last time.
Last week we went to, I want to say 11.
Yeah, we got through a lot. Again, we have not got a volunteer to break these longer. In other words, break these questions into individual videos. When we do that, find that we will do so because we've built up quite a body of answers on a host of topics.
I probably need to just sit down and do it myself, but I have the interview videos to actually finish first. So there's a priority order in all things.
Yes, sir.
It would be great if there was just a tool that took your timestamps and did it automatically from that.
Yes. Like this is ripe for automation because my timestamps are on the spot. I make sure it's on the second. If I could go down to the frames, if I could go down to the frames like I do in DaVinci Resolve, I would have done it.
All right. All right. So, Martin, the first question. Oh, wait a minute. Usually,
I'll read it.
Francis reads off the question.
Don't take his job.
What?
I
don't want his job. I couldn't do his job.
All right. Question number 1. Please deliberate. Why is capitalism bad? Yeah. Somebody really knows how to push Martin's buttons.
Well, there are disagreements on what capitalism means. When I criticize capitalism, I criticize it as it exists and must exist. And those pointing out what we have is short of the ideal are essentially saying real capitalism has never been tried. Even by the standards of its proponents, the first problem is that there's no possibility of large amounts of money not translating into political power that can, among other things, be further used to manipulate the market for one's favor. Proponents of capitalism would, however, reject the sort of authoritarian leadership that would be required to keep this effect at least somewhat in check. Second, parity effect leads to production of monopolies that are either very hard to compete with or outright impossible for a natural monopoly which monopolizes a scarce resource. Third, the narrative that markets selecting for most profitable ventures automatically leads to most productivity and efficiency is simply false. Market produces rent-seeking wherever possible, especially in the fire sector, which is finance, insurance, real estate. Overall trend has been clearly towards providing services for rent wherever that's an option instead of letting the customer own the product, especially a durable product that doesn't require a quick replacement or that customer is capable of fixing. The slogan "you'll own nothing and you'll be happy" superficially sounds like communism, but as we see from the above, the endpoint of capitalism is the same. And instead of the government with those monopoly corporations functioning as quasi-government. With free trade and open borders, all but a few end up working endless hours for slave wages. Both capitalism and communism were spread by eliminating national, community, and familial bonds and associated traditions as people removed from any group and any higher purpose make perfect customers and perfect labor, and everything that would have been sacred to them can now be privatized, sold, and consumed. The problems are really metaphysical. The premise of the system is fundamentally identical with that of communism in that it is utilitarian, putting individuals and their happiness as an end rather than any higher purpose, and this then allows enrichment of any organized group that understands keeping money and opportunity in the group makes them richer at the cost of those atomized individuals. The desired alternative is a system for the benefit of the population rather than for the merchants, one that doesn't view the nation as labor and custom approval, but as a family and army working towards common goal, where the jobs can be allowed to consume all of individuals' life at the cost of their roles in the family and community, where merchants have absolutely no say over how country is run.
God, Martin, you're so fucking good. This is amazing. Really. I mean, if any of the insults I ever give you were actually serious, I take them back. Okay. Wow. Okay, I can only sort of up level that. I can take it up from a slightly higher level. First, there is a very intentional confusion, an intentionally generated confusion over the meaning of the term capitalism. Has three basic meanings. The first is that it is the use of the institution, the maximization of the institution of property rights, and the economic analysis that results from it. Right? It's basically the ethics of the market. And in the way those of us who work in economics see it, that's the lens we see it through. However, the second thing is we can look at it, which is Martin is clearly addressing here, as a political economic system, or more correctly stated, and this is the real problem, I think, the conversion of a poorly understood historical treatment of the society as building and retaining capital, with the government treating the society as maximizing production and consumption. And so what occurred is that we went from what Martin is correctly describing as, and what we need to return to is, a moral ambition, which is really a nice word for what we call capital in toto, which includes human well-being and happiness and the time with family and whatever. In other words, what it resulted in, here's what I'm sorry, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head the first time, is that previously we used the family as the intergenerational family as the system of measurement for political action, moral action, religious action. At present, we are using, instead of the family and capitalizing in the family, we're using consumption instead, production and consumption instead. So where we had a historically unarticulated, perhaps subconscious or philosophical, or maybe even just traditional understanding of the balance sheet as the way we made political decisions. Today we have had since the early part of the 20th century, or maybe even the late 19th, we have had an income statement understanding of, which is why we're burning down, as what Martin was illustrating, we're burning down capital, partly because we're not producing it, and partly because we're just consuming it. So the problem in that sense is that it's a political economic system that is not understanding its own system of measurement. And this is what gives rise to what Martin calls the merchant dominance. Is that how you're putting it, Martin? Dominance of
to outright merchant rule.
Yes.
I'm not the one on the right pointing out.
Okay. So I'm going to throw a hypothesis out in a minute. And the third is it's an ideological label, right? That's used to how do I say, to play all sorts of verbal games with which of those things is which with whether capitalizing or consumption or some other thing such as state monopolism, right? Some other thing is the best answer because no one's addressing the core problem, which is what I mentioned in my sort of step 2, which is the political economics. So I'm not sure of this, but if I do my thing, which is look at the world as evolutionary computation, I suspect that there was no way for us to know what we were doing, because people tend to assume that the world is everything else in the world is going to stay the same when we make a fundamental change to our behavior in it. But that's not what happens. If you make a fundamental change to behavior, it's all sorts of equilibrating forces take effect over time. So what the simple way of saying that is, if you have a bunch of traditions that are built to capitalize and you organize a society for consumption, then what you will do is eventually lose the organization of your society for capitalization. In other words, we're destroying the intergenerational family and the nation in favor for global finance and consumption, which I've argued back in the early 2000s or late 90s. I've argued that we had reached the point in the West where the only thing left to consume was virtue signals or status signals, or what is it called when you have privileged thoughts, or luxury beliefs.
Yes.
And so the luxury beliefs, the status signals, and the virtue signals, those are all evidence of an extreme the extreme limit of excess consumption instead of capitalization. And so when I look at this, I'm not sure that we aren't simply going through the natural evolutionary, computational process. We're not rocket scientists after all. Or, excuse me, we're not prescient after all. Is that I think we've computed the end, just like the end of communism. I think we are computing the end of what I don't know if it's capitalism, but the end of consumption rather than capitalization, as the individual consumption rather than familial capitalization or national capitalization. I think we're computing the end of that, or we're seeing the end of that, and this disruption is what we're beginning to and about to experience as we find the alternative. I think that the alternative is going to be a lot closer to somewhere between Germany and Japan in the World War, who were both trying to solve this problem, which would be a state religion, a state priority rather than a global priority, and more of a private-public partnership than the current one in the West, which throws responsibility over the wall to the economic sector and then taxes that economic sector instead of working with the economic sector to the way, I guess, pretty much the way I would say the fascists did. Possible.
Is the term. Corporatism is the term you're looking for.
Thank you. And so my view is we're probably exhausting that because unlike political systems that are authoritarian and have the capacity to endure catastrophic mistakes for long periods of time, we don't have that. And so I suspect that we'll go through this crisis and the result will be some version of what we of corporatism that that redirects the value proposition back to the intergenerational family. And what did you say? How did you put it? You said it all in here. It's the family. What did you call it? The benefit of the population rather than for merchants, one that doesn't view a nation as labor and customer pool, but as a family and army working towards a common goal, where jobs can't be allowed to consume all of individual's life and the cost of roles in the family and community, where merchants have absolutely no sway over. Also, Martin tends to use the word merchants. He's not wrong, but I tend to use the financial sector because if you look at the trillions that are pulled out of the economy into the financial sector, that's actually how I see the problem. I see the problem as finance and its capacity to not only national finance but global finance and its capacity to use what we call capitalism as an indirect taxation system for a value they do not provide, which should have been, as I've argued in the past, maintained in the state. In other words, the monarchy should never have given the Bank of England over to and even in America, where we thought we understood what we were doing, the problem was that we lacked the ability to regulate the state. And its abuse of money, as had been done by the monarchies, and so they tried to keep it private. Well, in making it private, they just made it so that once fiat money was invented, that was possible to extract from the people indirectly on massive scales. There's actually no reason for under fiat money, which is for consumer interest on anything, any durable good. Once something ends up in the hands of consumer, financing it by simply what people can afford to pay is all that's necessary. And if we were doing this even better, we were running more like the monarchies or more like what do you call Silicon Valley. The state would act much more as a venture capitalist, not for these lovely NGOs that seek to undermine civilization, but in other words, not as that sense, giving money away, but the opposite, as venture capitalists, and that the state who as a venture capitalist on behalf of the people would retain some ownership interest, just as investors do. And that this would reduce the taxation, the distribution of taxation problems onto the population, and give the state a better incentive to obtain revenues than the one it obtains today, which is about as irresponsible as it can be. So that's my diagnosis of Martin's correct articulations, my diagnosis of the cause and potential cure of it.
Well, when I use merchant, I'm just referring to the class of people that has been around forever.
Yes.
Contrasted with warriors, priests, and peasants.
Correct. I understand what you're doing. Yes.
Modern financial sector is just a beautiful demonstration of what merchants do when they're allowed to.
Yes. Thank you. So we have the usual problem of maintaining the trifunctionalism so that there's a competition moderated by the courts, so that neither the merchants nor the talking classes nor the force classes, the state, can engage in some form of extraction. The problem is that we have to recognize what's going on in order to fix it. And in the book, the Crisis of Our Age that I'm working on, I view the primary problem as a combination of epistemic, in other words, not knowing what's going wrong, measurement, which means that we have to have a way of sensing, perceiving, and measuring what's going wrong in order to identify it, which turns out to be pretty hard. And the third is we have institutional lag. The way we work today is that the common law system is reactive rather than proactive, and that usually means it's faster at correcting private sector problems, but it's slower at correcting public sector problems. And so the legislation lags, and we have ideological differences because it turns out the sex differences in cognition have been expressed in the past century or so. And so when you get to this problem, there's no equivalent that there used to be under the common law of the capacity to essentially sue the state to act. We should practically in the past, you had the church court, the manor court, the civil court, and the parliament to go to. We don't have that anymore. We can't petition parliament like we can have the courts. When you petition a court, they have to do something, right? Even if it's turn it down or deny not decide not to choose it. But we can't do that with our parliaments. So we have no way of identifying and correcting these things. The innovation in the 20th century was the class action suit. However, it's so biased toward the private sector that it's hard to use it against the public sector. And so the way we fix things today is, unfortunately, you have to vote someone who's a muscle man into government who will then do what Trump is doing right now to try to correct it. But that just means that we have to do, we go through periods of crisis to correct things rather than we use the court system to continuously moderate things so they don't get so far out of hand. Anyway, boy, I think that's between Martin and I, that's a pretty good discussion of the cause and consequence of the problem. So what I say, we can have moral capitalism, which means that the system of measurement prohibits all the things that are not directly, in other words, a lot of things that capitalism in its current form, which is the merchant or finance capitalism, and Brad calls it, he's got a word for it, monopoly capitalism. He calls it something like that. Under our current situation, the system of measurement necessary to limit the use of property rights and free trade and credit and contract and all that other stuff that makes it possible. We don't have a system of measurement that allows us to measure its limits and failures, because a lot of it's basically irreciprocal. It's indirectly irreciprocal. In other words, moral, criminal, immoral, criminal, whatever. So our system of law is old, and it's basically built on directly irreciprocal rather than indirectly irreciprocal. So a lot of the law, the reformations we're proposing in the law, are to eliminate the indirectly irreciprocal, specifically the financial sector's irreciprocity, which is, we've discussed, the state's irreciprocity, which of course we think of as corruption, which we're starting to see a hell of a lot of, and the talking sector's corruption, which is baiting into hazard or seduction into hazard. So we have to have a system of measurement, which we have written a whole book on, that allows us to measure what irreciprocities exist, identify them, and legally prohibit them, because that's what an economist thinks capitalism is, but that's not what people who experience capitalism identify it as. They identify it correctly as Martin's definition.
So capitalism after merchants takeover has been exalted as this great form of organizing societies. What should we call, so if we're to correct the framing, what should we call the system where the courts continuously modulate the trade between the tri-functions, the feminine, the state, and the ascendant male, taking into account all forms of capital, and still have markets in everything, such that between the tri-function we can conduct trade, conducting reciprocal trade. If we don't call that so people wants people tend to gravitate toward a term, and less so on a concept. So what should we call this optimal
Well, first thing, I disallow markets in everything.
Well,
if not markets and everything, how do you conduct trade?
Hold on. I want to switch this up.
You conduct trade where you're allowed to conduct trade, but not everything should be traded.
Here's the thing: if you don't have a market for certain things, there's just going to be a black market.
Can I answer the question? The answer to the question is that the answer is trifunctionalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is rule of law by the natural law. That's the answer. That's actually the answer. That's what that's the difference our ancestors came up with, which was that there were priests and there were lawgivers, and they were not the same. And so we had both elites, and they took care of in practical terms, they took care of superstitious things on one hand, or psychological things, and they took care of real world things. And then it was that's how they took it. In our world, we have rule of law. What we have done is we've articulated the next evolution of rule of law for us, the scale of human civilization that exists. And so if we have that, and we prohibit, we only allow truthful reciprocal things, and that means not only personal things but political things. Or in other words, we don't put together schemes that allow the consumption of capital in toto. In other words, stealing from one another indirectly. If we have that's rule of law. The problem is that just like capitalism is a goofy term, right? It's intentionally been abused. It was originally invented as criticism, right? So it's intentionally abused, so we can't use it rationally, which Martin was trying to illustrate. But just as capitalism is abused, so has rule of law. I mean, the left has undermined rule of law.
They have gradually redefined it as rule by law, which is the kind of rule by law that totalitarian states or authoritarian states like China uses.
Yes. So they have destroyed that term. So what we would call it is we would just live under rule of law. Then the only markets that would exist would be moral markets. Right. I mean, that's the whole point. If you have the capacity, you basically say or engineer society, not to say you must do it this way, but that you may not do it these ways because that's a violation of rule of law by the natural law. So again, most of our work is dedicated to the correction of this problem. The issue becomes then, and this is hopefully to address Martin's concern, is that it's hard unless you specifically articulate the goal, the kind of capital that you're trying to produce, right? Which is Martin's. Yeah, I love this. For the benefit of the population, rather than right, one that doesn't view the nation as a labor and customer pool, but a family and army work towards common goal, right? So if you're trying to make capital, right, which I'm going to tell you, in the end, it's just going to be what we call informal capital, right? It's psychological capital, social capital, familial capital, and social capital, and therefore national capital. It's informal capital, Hayekian capital. So it's like the same reason what we've done, Martin and I have done in many cases, is specifically articulate things so that they're not switched by meeting or other game playing, right? Right. So what Martin and I have done is define things very specifically. Well, the same thing was with the Bill of Rights. They wrote the Bill of Rights, but they didn't write all of the rights, and worse, they didn't articulate it as the common law is a system of empirical, right? And they didn't even mention.
They did not mention the assumptions that they went in with the Bill of Rights, and nor did they define in such a language that it's not open to interpretation.
Right. And so they left their system of measurement was sufficiently precise for the moment, but insufficiently precise for the future. And so that's why I say there's only whatever the number of holes we say in the Constitution, depending on how finally you want to dice them. If you plug those holes, it's basically a system. It's basically a system of self-rule, right? That limits, that prohibits irreciprocities, and it depends largely on the empirical pair of I forget the word, commonality and concurrency, where commonality is we have to find in the via negativa, we have to have an evidentiary trial, and in the positiva, the concurrency, we have to make sure there's concurrency among the regions and classes. In other words, there has to be agreement. So the left has done everything possible, and the right hasn't been exactly helpful, has done everything possible to undermine commonality and concurrency by creating an authoritarian state with which to take advantage of what they seem to think is this endless growth that's going to go on forever. Yet the endless growth has come to an end. It really ended in the 70s. It's probably been by the 90s, it was that we had ended the material benefits of consumption. I mean, I positioned it as by the time we hit the 90s, we'd fulfilled the middle class ambition, right? The middle class fantasy that was really the war, post the war era, and the pre-war, war, and post-war eras attempt to create a world of prosperity. But now we're in a world where, I mean, everybody's signaling instead, or magical thinking in some terms, luxury beliefs. So, all right.
Well, I'll add some clarifications. When I'm hearing markets in everything, I'm hearing everything must be open to the process of creative destruction, which I reject.
No, well, I mean, that's not what I mean. I think what I mean by marketing everything is you can conduct trade in those markets. You can conduct and trade in everything that is true.
Does not impose on capital and total.
What I want is that we can also deny or decide what cannot be traded, what must stay as is.
Okay, so hold on. Yeah, but I said that already. right? There are things that cannot be traded, right? Or costs imposed upon. Those things are natural, right? But if you want arbitrary things, right? I would consider like arts and monuments an arbitrary thing, right? Now, monuments in particular, because in the West we make monuments to heroes. That's probably a quasi-religious issue. But I mean, people like the the fucking nutbags who try to destroy Mona Lisa or something like that. That's, that's a violation of the sacred. But why do we consider it sacred? I mean, it's very close to, again, a religious thing. So, but Martin, if you wanted to come up and say we are treating these things as sacred, all right, because it's in the interest of our people, you just list them, right? I mean, those are when you say something is sacred, you're saying it's capital that people cannot impose a cost upon, whether it be to privatize, harm, or whatever. So I think that what we're doing wrong when you hear markets and everything is that we're saying markets in everything open everything that we desire to trade, that we do not prohibit from markets. How about that?
Right. Everything that we do not prohibit in trading, because if we trade those things, then it becomes irreciprocal.
Correct.
It damages someone's. It will damage someone's demonstrated interest.
Yes. So all you're really saying, Martin, is you have to enumerate demonstrated interests the way and they have to be real, right? You can't make stupid shit up.
So I would correct that. I will correct what I said before. I said before it's marketing everything that's tradable. It's actually, there are some things that are tradable, but we will prohibit from trading in those things, those intangible forms of those capital, because doing so will damage the demonstrated interest of the polity.
Yes.
There was some other thing I wanted to clarify.
This is what it takes to get Martin to give you the things you're missing. Is he's got an intuition that is pessimistic, and so you have to have these discussions.
Push his button in the right way.
You have to push his button in the right way. He'll find it, but you have to push him in the right way. I don't know. I find I work the same way. I have to be pushed into the right direction too. But I mean, this was a pretty good discussion of capitalism we've had so far. Martin, what are you suspecting? What's bothering you?
Well, there was one other thing I wanted to add, and it's not coming up. I need to make notes.
So for the audience, this is I just find this enjoyable. Is that I am completely.
I remember.
I have. I'm one second. That I'm the product of the Enlightenment, and especially the Anglo Enlightenment, and so I have Anglo-American foolish optimism about human nature. Martin does not have an Anglo-American foolish optimism about human nature. Go ahead.
That all those reforms, I obviously agree with them, but I see that those wouldn't get to the core of the problem, which is incentives of those that rule, and those need to be replaced with people that have the right incentive.
Well, I mean, the humans we have, the best we can do is produce an adversarial system that selects against the power of those people. The only way I know how to do that is a court where you have the court and laws, which produces, quite humorously compared in relation to your argument, a market for the suppression of those kind of people. And that's what a court does. The court and the law does. It produces a market for the suppression of those kind of people. The problem is it can only suppress what we identify.
Yeah, but I'd rather explicitly and intentionally put in place people that don't view the society as an economic zone. And
well, this is a great. Okay, now you've identified the real issue. Okay,
but they're not.
You've got it. How do we put people in place? How do we choose them? You know, in our history, the scale was small, right? So we could elect our kings, right? Which we did through most of our history. We only stopped electing kings because the power transfer process started to get out of hand as states got large. So what do we do other than electing people? Or how do we know that those people are good?
It just means I don't have the exact answer yet, but change the system such that it doesn't attract the sort of people that are just trying to profit into power.
Yes, which means that you are embodied with a special trust. Like in the private sector, it's called fiduciary responsibility. If you break that trust, they rain hell down on you and ruin you. We don't do the same thing in politics, and we need to. The one question is that of war, which the Romans handled by giving away dictatorship for the duration of the conflict. But yeah, I think the problem of selecting a person is quite difficult at any scale. I agree with you.
Well, that's why it should just be a monarch, and then you don't have to select.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that's why I say the monarchy is necessary, if for no other reason than to throw the fucking bums out, right? I mean, Trump is a great example of what a monarch would do, and it's unfortunate that he has the power, and the British monarchy is afraid to use it. I
would argue the British monarchy does not really have the power, because it's like you said, power are only what people give you.
Yes.
By changing the people under the British crown, they have essentially robbed the monarchy of that power.
Correct.
Well, I expect most people would actually give them the power, but they're not willing to.
Who? Certainly not the Muslim immigrants living in London.
Yeah, but would they be able to organize against resistance if it came up?
I have to eat my coffee.
I still don't think so.
Well, I hope that's still the case, that there are enough pure-blood Brits left to heed the king's call.
Yeah,
I know the SAS guys definitely will. Like, if not all the SAS guys, at least the vast majority of them will. SAS is Special Air Service, basically.
So what you're really saying, France, is that people who bear great responsibility at great risk tend to demand equal responsibility from others, and so they're the ones who are best deciders. Which was the argument for voting by property in the first place. Now, we think of property as like owning your house, but in the past, owning property meant you were a businessman. You produced goods and services for the market, which meant you had to be responsible for the collective, because you were responsible for the collective. And the second thing is that you could get, if you fought in the military, you were responsible for the collective, even if you were doing it because of great chance for raping and pillaging and profiting from it. I was supposed to get a smile out of you for that. And so they came home, but they had respect and merit because they had taken on a responsibility at great risk. So,
well, I mean, it's property in total, right? Defending the polity and to ensure sovereignty, that in itself is a form of capital, even though you can't like point and name at it. It's not like a shop or a field or house or something that you can actually touch, but it's nonetheless a form of capital.
Correct. So the issue then is as we've argued in the past, that if you want to select people who are responsible, you need to pick the limit who selects the people to those who have demonstrated responsibility. Mm-hmm. So the argument, I make all the time is that I really love going to the voting booth, and it's not even a booth anymore. It's just so weird the way they do things today. But you go to do your makeup to cast your vote. You fill out these things, and it feels good to have your say, and all these other people feel good to have their say. There's a real benefit in that piece. The question is whether the people who have their say are having a say worth having. And the problem is they're not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's the point, to make them feel good without anything having to change.
Well, yes, or to make them feel good, and in doing so, seize the opportunity to make things worse, which is what's happened.
I don't like that neutral language, people just having to be responsible for what, for which people, or for which people's benefit.
Okay, we've spent close to an hour on this question. Shall we move on?
Well, it's funny because I was thinking a minute ago, I was getting my coffee, thinking, the problem is it's an hour-long question.
True.
Right? I mean, I pulled up the list today, and I see Martin's written a fucking essay, and I'm like, okay, this has got to be a hard, because all I saw was a field of red characters. All right, okay, it's a hard question. All right,
question 2. Please deliberate. What does managerialism even mean? I've seen it used by libertarians to completely dismiss any authority as part of the managerial state. But I've also seen it used as the descriptive term by right-wingers. That being said, what is managerialism?
It's a system predicted by James Burnham, which he distinguishes from capitalism in that owners of means of production no longer control them due to its scale and required expertise, and that these managers would eventually control the entire regime and grow more authoritarian. In contrast, Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany were seen as managerial by design. As indicated previous question, I don't draw the same distinction between capitalism and managerialism, seeing the latter as an inevitable conclusion of the former. As what Burnham considers capitalism contained power vacuums that were always going to end up filled. Genuine right-wingers ought to at least be considering it's a mistake to entirely object to managerial state, but rather that for the above reasons, we may need our own managerial elites acting for our benefit if limited in their ability to meddle in personal lives of the people.
Beautiful. Yeah, I can't. It's just what's his book called?
Managerial Revolution.
Yes, the Managerial Revolution. You should read it. It's a beautiful book. It's very bright. I think if I can add anything to here, because Martin's just sort of hit it on the nose. The piece you say is the most interesting is the power vacuum. What did you say here?
What Burnham considers capitalism contained power vacuums that were always going to end up filled.
Yeah, it's really, the way I try to describe it is the power distance problem. The power distance creates anonymity distance. Anonymity distance creates opportunity. The more anonymous, the more remote, the lower the power distance, the bigger the problem of sense perception, both by the managerial bureaucrat, basically, and by the person being disabused by such bureaucrat or bureaucrats. The way we argue this generally is that you design for small. In other words, you design political systems so that they have the minimum number of people that can serve the interests of the shortest power distance. So what happens in the government, like what happens in the private sector, and I've been a participant in that, is so if I go out and I'm trying to build a company, a big company, right? I go looking for smaller companies, a bigger fish, smaller fish. I go looking for smaller companies that are capital constrained or some other means of growth limited, which I can solve. And so I buy those companies, therefore solving the problem of their capacity to scale. This usually involves more money put in. It involves more operational constraint put in, and involves more sales put in, right? And so, but the problem is, at some point, you end up with the opposite problem. You build your company to some point where the kind of your capacity to rule the business, right, govern, manage, is limited by the fact that you actually have so many people under so many different conditions that any general rule you develop that's universal is actually harming something somewhere. You're leaving some market sector behind, or you're disenfranchising some employee, or whatever. And the way companies currently make up for this is that the reason they're big is they're generating some amount of money largely by doing something successful, and so they simply pay people to stay. And so you get to this. That's a different kind of corruption, so to speak. In the government, they extract more, rather, right? So employees can extract from a company just like bureaucrats can extract from the population. So what I'm sort of getting to is that the optimum solution is the same thing for nation states instead of empires, is the same thing for regional offices, or basically or confederations of companies rather than
conglomerates.
Conglomerates.
Discoveries are conglomerates of smaller companies, each with
Correct.
their own P&L.
Correct. And so they measure their measurement system maintains its precision. And so you want to work with, I always thought of it as Dunbar numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And the people who did this the most successfully, who are famous for it, the people who make Velcro, or who invented and made Velcro.
Is that 3M?
I don't know. I would have to go back and look it up. Or we can quickly go to one of the LLMs to ask the question. But originally, their whole thing was to keep their organizations under the Dunbar number, and it's why they were one of the reasons they attributed it to their success.
Oh, it's actually a Swedish company, the Velcro IP Holdings.
Now, who invented it?
Founded by Swiss electrical engineer Georges de Mestral in the 50s. And now it's a... So, I did not know this. I thought 3M made Velcro, but the Velcro is actually a separate brand. Formerly Velcro SA. And it's a private company. Wow.
So take a very simple technology that tends to be profoundly valuable, right? Anyway, so it's this. The idea is basically you have this conflict between if you acquire a lot of companies, one of the things you do is you get rid of the upper management, right? Because they're doing the job you're doing, and they're also usually highly paid, right? And so you keep the second layer, right, who's actually doing all the sort of work, and then you incorporate these people in. I've bought a lot of companies, and it's surprising how few senior people survive acquisitions. And it's because it's not clear that they actually provided much value.
Well, senior in terms of management.
Yes.
Not senior in terms of people actually doing the work. You
want
to keep those people because they have all the tribal knowledge of how this stuff works.
Right, but those are the people you promote into positions of power. Right, that's who you put when you acquire companies. You're trying to find those people. The problem is, and the problem I've had in nearly every company I've acquired is, and I'm not good at personality that much, but I'm pretty good at the IQ point thing, and the lying thing. And so I just talk to a lot of people, and they've got to tell you, the people who you're acquiring, the executives do not like it. I do it anyway, which is I talk to a lot of people in the organization, and I'm pretty gregarious, so people will talk to me. And I sort of try to figure out before the deal closes who's the people I should be listening to. And it's actually incredibly easy to tell because they're all the same. They don't have any emotion band up with it. They just have a factual representation of the strengths and weaknesses of the company. Because they don't have the political leanings. The problem with most companies is that there are political relationships that are not business relationships.
What you said a few minutes ago just made me thought about it. It's when you acquire a sizable company, you at the top who makes law, in a manner of speaking. The middle, not only does it harm certain part of a company, but even if how can I describe it? That at some point the middle management becomes the problem in that they have their own fiefdoms, their own political relationships, and their own interest rent-seeking arrangements to protect, such that your initiatives, your change does not properly get propagated to the level that it needs to be executed on, i.e. the people who are actually doing the work. That's where the middle management becomes a problem. And I've seen this just so many times.
Oh yeah, well, you've been in places where it's very easily expressed and visible, right?
Absolutely.
So just as an aside, this is one of the reasons I invented our product, is because I view the middle management as the problem. It's not only
they've been promoted. They have been promoted into a position of what's the Peter principle? Inadequacy, position of incompetence. That's right.
So the way I look at it in the product is that I want to create influencers, not managers. In other words, the system should provide the management, right? I want to be able to project downward and see what's going on. But I want to develop influencers who essentially influence the direction. And so the way you protect your influence is moving the body forward in a team rather than containing knowledge within yourself of your department or group. And so Max used to say that, you've made this product, but it's actually a way of managing. You have a management philosophy inside of the product. I don't know if it's management philosophy. It's just social fucking science. people behave this way, and you need an information system that circumvents the tendency of people to get negative behavior. I had the opposite thing. I remember we were building Excel data, and we built that to a $100 million company pretty fast. And I was spending most of my time trying to engineer because I was responsible for the project side of the business, right? And there was an IT side of the business, like we did all Microsoft shows, right? And events. Then we had the body shop side of the business, which is where the profit comes in. And then there's the project side of the business, but the project side of the business is where your status comes in, right? It's what gets you reputation, because you're not just a body shop, right? You're people who take responsibility for projects. So that was my third of the business. And I spent all my time on things like designing libraries that would make people more productive, or doing proposals and designs of systems, or hiring people. But I always made sure I was billable, right? And that's why I maintained influence. I'm not going to get fired no matter what, as long as I'm billable, right? And so I tried to be an influencer rather than a manager, and it was very successful. And I saw that is the problem of because by the time we were building Excel data, I'd been acquiring companies. It wasn't my choice this time. I joined slightly after the original management team founded the business. But by then I'd of course acquired, I don't know how many companies, quite a few. And so by then I had understood the problem. And of course, once we built a couple, I did 2 other companies in between. You're trying to, when you acquire talent, there's always some people who want to have time to play, rather than play or experiment or think or whatever, instead of build. And then there's other people who want to hide that playing with managerial responsibilities. And then there's a tendency of all human beings to expand a job to fill all available time, right? And so you have all these natural forces going on that are unproductive. And the way you solve that in business is you have small organizations. You run them by projects rather than departments, programs and projects rather than departments. And you move people around. In other words, you create a pretty dynamic system that minimizes the opportunity for people to develop rents. And that's basically creating a market, if it isn't obvious. So, because if you're a person who actually produces something, the people who are great communicators or great talkers or great reporters or great gossips or whatever you want to call it, then they'll do whatever they can for political effect or loyalty. They're actually a problem for the people who do work.
Oh yeah.
They're a real problem for the people who actually do work. The problem is, from management, unless you have a platform like our application, right? How do you see that shit? How do you get around it? You can't. You're always dependent upon the human chain of the communication. So the whole point is remove the need for the human chain of communication by providing a direct inspection system into what's going on everywhere.
So I'm going to ask a corollary question. So as I understand that the managerialism arises out of Industrial Revolution, where the scale production has grown to a point where it's impossible for a single person or even a small group of person to manage it.
Well, the problem happened under the monarchies, in that the only way for you to get really wealthy was to get a job with the monarchy, right? And so the concept of excess elites becoming parasitic elites is actually emergent under the monarchies as well, and under the kingdoms before that, and under the republics before that. So anytime people can exit the market, they will. Right? People, we want the effect of the market, but only a few of us actually enjoy the market process. I mean, I want a market because I'm happy to compete in it and find my whatever my level is within it, right? But there are people who do not wish to compete in that market, not only because it's difficult to understand and difficult to succeed at, but it requires a rate of adaptation that most people are not capable of. Just under the IQ is basically a rate of adaptation question, right? And so if you at some point we've created this demand for everybody to be in the market because it's the most effective way of incentivizing people to do what's good for everybody else. On the other hand, unions were pretty comfortable for a lot of people, right? You get set to where you're gonna work, right? And that's a pretty useful way of working, and you're given some security against flooding the market by the fact that unions require union workers. So you get a higher salary, you get protection, you get some market insulation from the markets. And an argument that I think Martin would make is that, Martin, wouldn't a lot of people prefer to be serfs?
Yeah, we had guilds for all of this, and it didn't protect just the workers, but also the customers. It ensured quality.
So I think that, like I was saying earlier, we're going through a phase. We're finding the end of the phase, right? And we're looking for new solutions. Now, we do mention this problem, is that we say that we try to treat the problem of equality under the law, is that we try to generate a system where everybody is subject to the same criteria and limitations, where the truth is that there are plenty of people who would be very happy to be told where to go to work and what to do this month, right?
Yep.
And so that they were not continually stressed by market discovery of opportunity, which is frankly too hard on them. Whereas some of us, I mean, I don't want to work in a world without a market, because, I mean, frankly, that means I'm going on my own merits and I don't have to work for people dumber than me, which I find extremely frustrating, as I'm sure Martin does. So does Francis.
I tolerate it in order to think of it as a form of mindfulness in order to trade for certain things.
Yes.
But I don't like participating in a market either.
Yes. Well, I mean, so that's the issue, is that we have created this oneness problem, and I think that we have made a mistake with not retaining the class structure, and I think we've made a mistake with not retaining the multiple layers of market participation. Right? There are people who are really, I mean, the military, you're basically a slave, right? If you're in a union, you're essentially a serf, right? And then there's probably those of us who are comfortable playing in the market. There are those of us who are comfortable using the market to concentrate sufficient capital that we are actually market competitors. And then there's those of us who work up that scale. And I just think we need to provide people that which provides mindfulness. In other words, provides them with the emotional, and in other words, you can feel pretty damn outcast if you're at the bottom today, right? And so, and you're not very protected. I mean, the reason you're protected at all in the States is because we're so stupidly wealthy that it's pretty easy to get by if you do anything. But there's a whole, I mean, it's real easy outside of our educated populations to find parts of America which are like, whoa, these things they're not, the only reason they're not third world is because the infrastructure that's provided them by the broader community in the states, in the market. All right, I feel like I'm going sideways here.
I was just, when you mentioned military, they were basically slave. So previous, I was trying to lead to a question, right? So when you mentioned the military, where it's basically slave, in today's industrialized world, if we say instead of military being, let's use armed forces, let's use warriors as an example of a marketplace. Can small bands of highly agentic warriors even compete with large slave-like armies?
Well, yeah, they have traditionally, just very poorly. I mean, in other words, the only reason small professional warriors win against large slave armies is maneuver. In other words, it's easier for them to maneuver. But large slave-like armies are incredibly effective at territorial suppression of a population, whereas it's very hard for professional warriors to maintain territorial suppression.
Because through that, I'm trying to ask a question of, we have this managerial state problem, and it rise out of even in the monarchy days, and with Industrial Revolution, it just took it as zenith. What, and if anything, has fundamentally changed that enables smaller, highly agentic group of people to compete with larger managerial states?
Can you ask that again?
I don't think I asked the question correctly. So
you did. I was going down too many permutations. I got distracted. Go ahead.
I'm thinking what. So if managerialism arise out of the monarchy days, and then it just came to zenith during the Industrial Revolution because of the need to manage ever.
It was actually communists. It was actually Soviets. It was the Soviets. Okay. Right, it was the Soviets. What we had in the past was you would go in the military, right, and so you would get an officer rank, and then and I'm just some schmuck working in the, working sector, and you would come and start a business or take over a business or run a business, and you would take the structure of military discipline into the industrial workplace, right? That's how you would do it, right? Once the Soviets come around with their managerial revolution, which is the centralization of the state, they used that, which is basically they flipped it around. They took the population was not military, right, but political, and they put them in charge of organizing the state as a military. In other words, they didn't pay market prices for labor. They nationalized the labor pool, and like the military, assigned people to jobs. Right? And so this is what created the managerial system. And it came, I think I've mentioned this before, it was successful because they were trying to catch up. Catching up is different from getting ahead.
I see.
Right?
You answered my question. So
right.
Once you've caught up, if you actually want to innovate and advance, you need people with agency.
Right. So the problem they faced was they had to create a market system from serfs, and right. And so they put this, they used the military structure but run by politicals with ideology instead of soldiers with practical, because there's nothing more empirical than being a soldier. Right? It's the most, there's risk. The risk is death or maiming, right? And so you organize people to prevent that, right? It's a very empirical process. So that gave you like the Prussian model. So, right, you got this Prussian model, which is still evident in how Germany runs today. But if you flip it around, you went to the Soviet model, they had serfs and they had politicals. And so they used the military structure to basically not have a market economy for labor. But, right, and so what they failed to do was switch to a market economy for labor. And the reason they failed is that because the managerial elite, the bureaucratic system,
they became rent seekers.
Right. And worse, they didn't have rule of law. Right? They didn't have rule of law. So the argument I always give people, and I don't have a lot of, because since we're off Facebook, I have far less contact with Africans who ask the really interesting questions. But if you want to, I tell people it's a really simple recipe. You have to have the military first, then you have rule of law implemented by the military, right? Then you get a productive class under rule of law, and you'll be able to create a market-driven economy that maximizes individual incentive and innovation. But if you try to do it any other way, you're stuck with the same problem. How do I create these things? So they never created rule of law, right? They never created it, and so they never.
So hold on. China also developed a military, but it did not end up with the rule of law.
That's right.
It ended up with a state.
Correct, for the same reason. Is which you've enumerated. Russia is an empire, right? It's an empire over a very large territory with very different peoples. I mean, if you go to Kazakhstan, you go to the border with Russia and Kazakhstan, I mean, what's the difference between that and Inner Mongolia? You know, I mean,
not much.
There's not much of a fucking difference. There's nothing there.
That border is very different from the Russian and Ukraine-Poland border.
Right. I mean, if you just look at a map of foliage, right? What do you call foliage? Greenery, right? Yeah. Europe ends before the Urals, right? Right. And the Eurasian plain, which starts, over in Western Europe and moves its way across, as soon as you get to just outside of Lviv, right? Lviv in Ukraine, it just turns into that fucking grassland, which is what the Ukraine map represents: the blue sky and the golden field, the golden.
And as your friend Roger liked to say, it's where barbarian spawns.
Yes. That's where the bad people come from. And so, to some degree, we've got the China over here, right? And you've got Europe over here, and there's like the crazy people in the middle because the territory is pretty freaking hostile. It's really good for horses, unfortunately. So they can build up legions of horse warriors with extraordinary maneuver. Combine that with recursive bows and stirrups, and Jesus, it's a pretty damning problem. Whether you have their choices, should I try to? It's like Afghanistan today. If it weren't for poppy, or making heroin over there, I mean, what are you going to grow over there that's going to be worth anything other than subsistence?
Yeah, that's why Soviets and Americans went there.
Sorry, what?
That's why Soviets and Americans went there for heroin.
Martin always finds the worst in everything. All right, so
okay, I think we exhausted this one. if we don't want to break our lowest number of questions answered per session,
all right.
We once answered once.
Wait a minute, Martin. I just want to compliment you, Martin, on the past two answers. They've been fantastic.
Thanks.
Francis, did you answer one?
I did. While you guys are debating about capitalism, I saw this one. I felt like I need to chime in. So question 3. Which will most likely win the next 10, 30, and 100 years? America or China? If you feel another country will be better than both, you can also include them. All right, I'm going to just read out my answer. So first of all, define winning. Winning may range anywhere from 1, a single political entity dictating political decisions for the rest of the nations, unlikely, and the rest of the nations on Earth, unlikely since even the Mongols did not pull that off in a pre-industrial society. And 2, become a dominant power in the region, able to influence, coerce the policies of neighboring countries, less so for the rest of the world, i.e. historically China occupied that position in East Asia. 3, economically, militarily, and politically sovereign without imposing will on the neighboring nations, i.e. e.g. Sweden after they went into their permanent neutrality thing, and any number shades in between, right? So this is the typical Thucydides trap framing that I think it's a very Western way of thinking. And I think it misses there's a danger in continuing this line of thinking because it misses the bigger picture. So who benefits from a Sino-American conflict? I know
No one.
that except for the desert tribe.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I don't want to see happen.
Do they count?
They count for what? As a winner?
Know what I mean? I'm being awful. I mean, are they really like civilized people? Do they count? I mean,
they are a form of civilization. Even a diaspora people do have a civilization strategy, and you have said that, right? So they count as a civilization, and I don't want that civilization to win because it spells doom for the rest of mankind.
Yes.
They're effectively stuck in a Bronze Age strategy.
No shit.
So anyways, that's kind of my long-winded answer. My bet is that some form of polity existing on the North American continent will come out being economically, militarily, and politically dominant on the world stage and able to wield its power to shape the outcome in its favor. And that's based on the geopolitics of the North American continent. Whether it exists in the form of the United States or some kind of federation, or maybe the greater North American sphere combining what's today Mexico, United States, and Canada, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm gonna look at it. I don't. If it weren't for the CCP, I wouldn't bet against China in a million years. So from my standpoint, you have the two most important civilizations. Put it this way. Yeah, I'll get this first. So I wouldn't bet against China at all for under any circumstance. The problem is the CCP. If you look at what China was doing, and it's going to have China's going to have its comeuppance like Japan did.
Except China grew old before it grew rich. Japan grew rich before it grew old. Rich in terms of productive capability and so on.
Right, but again, I'm not sure I'm willing to bet against China in the long term. I'm willing to bet against the CCP even in the medium term. Mm-hmm. So my future of China is dependent upon whether they can produce some equivalent of a federation that is more akin to their 90s performance, or they maintain under some power structure that is attempting to catch up, which is good, right? Power structures are good to catch up, right? but they are really bad at staying ahead, and they are really bad for their people once you've caught up. So I have no idea. I'm going to tell you how I actually look at the future, and it's going to sound awful. I apologize, but you have we have a bunch of civilizations that are genetically different. Because they're genetically different, they're civilizationally different, right? So they're territorially different and genetically different. And because they're territorially and genetically different, they are civilizationally different. And civilizations must develop means of political organization, political, social, economic, political organization that suit the demographic demands of the population. Those are permanent constraints. In other words, territory and genetics are permanent constraints or permanent opportunities for any population. Of the people who had the territory, genetics, and development necessary to produce civilizations, we know them, right? They're the major civilizations. The major civilizations represent the major races. And the reason there's major races is because a civilization that enables he who breeds, right, will win. Because in the end, that's what matters, is he who breeds and he who has the highest demographic genetic composition on a territory over which he or she has the most control. Mm-hmm. Islands are so beneficial. So, so my view is that the circumpolar people, which is going to be the East Asians, the Europeans through Russia, and less, and demographically India, because India has a long way to go, even though I don't know how far it can go. So I believe we're sort of stuck with the Americans, the North Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, and the East Asians. I see them as needing to split the lands to the south of them as core civilizations, with the only problems being Islam, because I'm not sure Africa is a problem. If Islam, and so my understanding is Islam is the cancer in mankind. Jews probably a little less so. I mean, and then because there's not enough of them.
Well, yet you mentioned CCP, and CCP is Jewish religion.
Well, I mean, I understand that, right? But that's why I say the problem is the CCP. It's not Chinese people. That's for goddamn sure. Sure. There's never been a problem for Chinese people, except they didn't redevelop rule of law, so they couldn't develop the high trust.
It's a Chinese civilization hijacked by a Semitic religion.
Yes. So the problem facing the world right now is the remaining empires, right? Only in the hold on. I'm not trying to provoke Martin here. I got to be careful, or Martin will give me a dissertation. The remaining agrarian empires, right, which is China, Russia, and Iran, pursuing the agrarian empire strategy, and the seditiousness of the Abrahamic religions in their forms, whether it be communism in the CCP, Judaism in the financial sector, world flat finance, and talking, and of course
Islam in their outward.
Correct. Their
expression of aggression.
Right, their feminine means of their They're very hyper-aggressive feminine means of expansion. So the real problem is I see in the world is that until we can suppress Islam, which is the problem for China, really, it's the problem for India, it's the problem for the West, and it's the problem for Africa. Until we can treat Islam as harshly as we did communism, the world is going to continue to have the problem, because we can't divide the labor of equal self-interest by developed economies to protect ourselves, the people who are demographically or genetically, I don't want to say superior, more advantaged from those people who are demographically and territorially less advantaged. So that's my understanding of the macro problem. In that sense, I see what Trump is doing, and it sort of makes sense to me. I don't like how he's doing it, but then again, he's making it happen quickly. So anyway, so that's my understanding of the long term. I think it's a great question, and I don't see it as who will win. I see it as, do we all win in the fight against devolution, right? Which is what I've hoped for, regardless of which bias we have, the American or the Chinese or the European or the Russian or the Indian. Do we all win? Because frankly, there's no reason we can't.
Like I said, define winning.
Winning is not losing.
I think. Well, again, like maybe you gotta define losing. I think losing to me means that this is my definition, that what the genetic stock that made your civilization, that makes your civilization successful, is completely diminished. That's losing. Winning could take on many different forms. If, for example, if China wins by importing a bunch of people from, not that I think it's going to happen, because the Chinese civilization stays incompatible with many different civilizations. But if it wins by the Chinese no longer holding civilization state, but become some kind of multinational, multi-ethnic empire that conquers the rest of Asia, I don't consider that winning.
No.
And likewise, when people think of American winning, would America really win if it became a North American empire, but loses its core civilization, i.e. the Europeans? I don't think that's winning either. Especially if you measure purely based on GDP, which is a terrible measure anyway, because it's income statement accounting versus balance sheet accounting.
Yeah, I think it's just awful to say this, but I mean, the data's, I keep this fucking enormous spreadsheet, which I talk about all the time, right? It's just IQ. I mean, it's just genetics. There's nothing else to it, right? And so if you've got IQ points, you need to protect them like you protect your territory, right?
And that produces the same problem. If other people have a higher IQ than our people, why shouldn't we replace them?
I say again?
No, I mean, I'm going to give examples. Having Jews in Israel is fantastic for the world, not just for us, right? The question is having them
somewhere away.
What?
Just having them somewhere other than here.
Madagascar.
No, I mean, look, so here's the thing, okay? The fact that our civilizational strategies are incompatible domestically does not mean we're incompatible internationally. Matter of fact, we're very compatible internationally. If you look at just the improvement in the understanding of how to do military research and development in Israel versus America, that's a huge difference. I mean, there's only 5-6 million of those people, and look what they pull off in R&D. It's fantastic. Now, we're probably subsidizing their ability to afford it. But that doesn't mean we aren't learning from it. And so I don't want high IQ populations to go away. The problem is, as we've all discussed, is that when you have a group of people here and a group of people here, it's a permanent irresolvable conflict. You know, the problem of isn't middle class and upper blacks in America. The problem is that we have a permanent underclass that nothing can be done with without parasitically preying upon the productive population. Well, there's going to be infinite political conflict under those situations. So the answer is, do I care if I have? I mean, the Jews only have a few IQ points on us. It's not a big deal, right? I mean, we could.
They make it a big deal.
They make it a big deal, right? But they can't make it a big deal if they're in their own country, right? They can only make it an advantage if they're in their own country. So, it's I don't know. It's like I have a friend who's runs he's Israeli, and he runs a YouTube channel, not terribly popular. I wish I could fix it. On what's going on in the economy regularly. And what I love about the guy is it's not this, a lot of Western talk is very close to what's called high church speech, right? It's actually a derivation of the pulpit, which is where our academic speech comes. It's a derivation of the pulpit, which is where our newscasting comes from, and our political speech comes. It's a derivation of the public. And so there's a lot of high-mindedness put in stuff. What I really like about this guy is he's Jewish. He's just like, this is just how it is, right? He says, this is going to happen. And so it's hard to be in the financial or economic market and be a predictor because, your chances of being right are very small, right? But it doesn't mean your understanding of what's going on is very small. You can understand what's going on. You may not be able to tell where it's going to be over time. Trump just did the Bitcoin thing yesterday, which means Bitcoin will play a game right now, but it'll eventually go up because the U.S. is going to use it as a reserve currency. Okay. All right. So Trump just signed that yesterday. Well, I've been thinking about this since at least last September, right? Maybe before then. And I've said, well, if that happens, Bitcoin's going to go through the fucking roof, because the minute U.S. starts buying X number of billions of it every goddamn year, right? It's going to just go up until it's crazy. So the Bitcoiners have won, not be the way they thought they would. They won the way I thought they would. They thought they were going to win because it would be independent of the federal states. And I said, no, we're just doing research and development on the behalf of the states. That's all you're doing. You're doing off-book R&D, so this governments don't have to. They're gonna take care of it, and it's going to turn into something. It's just not going to turn into the criminal currency that you want it to do. It'll turn into the legitimate currency that the government wants it to.
And also, I don't think it's going to be one currency in that they actually conduct everyday commerce with it. It's store value as a POW. It's right. Like there's for the same reason that you don't go to a store and give them gold bars to go buy stuff.
Transaction fee is too high. So it'll be a great store of value though, and it certainly solves the shortage of gold problem, right? All right. So I forgot where we were. I'm sorry.
You were talking about different civilizations. Which one is that the problem? I think it ended up being. It's not so much a problem when I will conclude it's not so much a problem when a people with different genetics and different civilization strategy exist in their civilizational states and compete / cooperate and trade with other civilizational states. It becomes a problem when those with different civilizational strategies exist within the same polity and start competing with other members of the polity.
Right. In other words, proximity generates hostility, which is the way it's been framed. And it's because it's an irresolvable problem without political power. So proximity in other words, mixing people who are of different distributions, produces demand for political privilege, which is only so happily satisfied by people in the state who love to be given the power to moderate differences. The real answer, which is not to have those differences in the same state.
And it's not just about those differences. People generally don't leave their loyalties behind.
Yes.
So, for example, a lot of Chinese in America still work for the benefit of China.
Which is why I don't want them here.
Yeah, I believe you're not one of them.
I've paid a lot of cost to adopt a different civilizational strategy.
That's worth a book, Francis. Honest, not that you have time for that, but that's worth a book, because I've been telling you forever. I mean, first of all, I'm definitely on the Asians, the ideal minority, right? I'm definitely in that camp, right? If I walk down the street and I see a bunch of other Asians, I'm like, the world is fine, right? It's when I see anybody else that bothers me, because now I have to worry, even if it's like Indians who are they're not dangerous specifically as individuals, but as a group, they're not exactly constructive.
Well, collectively, they're seeking political power.
Right. So it'd be interesting to have you write a book on that, because it's worth talking about how to do it. Because I talk to you, and to me, you're just another parent of aristocracy, right? That's how I perceive you. But I don't know how you managed to do that. I mean, you still have definite Chinese cognitive biases, right? Mm-hmm. I don't even know if they're biological or cultural. I have no idea.
That's my question. That's something I've been wondering too. So is it because if it's biological, then eventually it would override whatever effort I've put into adopting the Western civilization strategy, and I think I'll see it in my descendants if it's biological. And I just don't have an answer to that. That's to how I did it. I have no freaking clue.
Not very helpful, but it's an honest answer.
Well, maybe I gotta look into some more.
All right, what's next?
I apologize. I do have to run in about 5 minutes. So if we can answer this question in the next 5 to 6 minutes,
this is a short one.
Let's do it. All right. So question 4. Curt talks about how we should make distribution contingent on single child reproduction. But unless we require sterilization after the first child, won't the lower classes continue breeding because they know the state will never just let them starve? And might not this also lead to a large increase in illegally aborted children after the first?
Martin?
The idea of natural law ought to be that there are some hard limits, and ban on clearly dysgenic policies that undermine their own sustainability is one of those. So yes, letting them starve would be one option. Others being conditioning welfare on castration, forced abortion, or simply treating having more kids as a crime. Voluntary option of castration and withdrawal of welfare as a threat seem like the most humane ones, still leaving an option of voluntary community and family support to those that can get it.
I just want to clarify that English isn't Martin's, despite his facility with English. It's not his first language. He means sterilization, not castration. otherwise, he's being comedic. I don't know. I got to ask him.
That's a form of sterilization.
I just want to add that this may come shocking to a lot of the audience, but it has been done in a country with more than 1 billion people within our living memory.
Yes. It's actually not a problem. It's not actually a difficult thing to do, but my claim was more statistical. Is that realistically, if you look at your uniqueness is 6 generations back. In other words, after 6 generations back, it's very difficult to separate your genes from the rest of the gene pool. In other words, the rule in the gene pool is that we tend toward the median, right? What's it called? Regress
to the mean.
Regress to the mean.
And certain families limit their gene pool.
Yes, well, that's the whole secret is you need to, and this is the problem with today is we're not really sure why the gene pool is degrading as much as it is. It appears to be that just reversal of asymmetric rates of reproduction. It used to be that if you had wealth, your children could live. Today, it's if you have wealth, you don't have any, right? And the poor people reproduce, and immigrants are below. Most of our immigrants now are below the threshold. In other words, they're not above 105. Mm-hmm. So in other words, this back 6 generations, the median of their gene pool is well below the median of the European gene pool. Right? That's how you have to think about it, is 6 generations back. Otherwise, you end up being confusing the individual with the group because there is regression to the mean. So the real solution is that we can keep you to have one child within 6 generations. Your genes are basically gone. And so that's the real goal is to take 6 generations to gradually decrease the harm of underclass reproduction. The real dispute is what's the barrier. Now, I would say that any population at present wants to aim for 115. Let's say the Jews are at 110 or 108, something like that. The East Asians are around 105, 107. Europeans are around 100 because that's where the baseline.
So I recently saw a tweet that somebody claims that East Asians is really around 100, and then Europeans are like 104 or something. And when somebody asked why, like how he got this reverse, he said East Asian cheats on IQ tests.
There are 2 reasons. That's funny, but there's 2 reasons for it. First of all, East Asian education is superior to Western in the production of knowledge that is testable.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Whereas Western education emphasizes untestable knowledge. Right. That's number one.
Or is it untestable knowledge or adaptation?
Okay.
Because adaptation is hard to test.
Yes.
And I would argue that adaptation is more important than crystallized knowledge.
It is for some things. In other words, there's always value in some kind of intelligence. The question is how much of it related to other kinds, right? So, I want to lose my thought there. So number one is the second thing is that East Asian testing tends to favor certain, be limited to urban sectors. In other words, the data we have is limited to those places that tend to have higher IQ populations. Right, that's the second piece. And third piece is yes, they cheat, right, a lot. So, but the answer.
How you cheat on the IQ test? How do you cheat on the IQ test?
Don't fucking ask me, dude. I'm just telling you what the argument is. Okay. I basically look at it as I believe that the natural difference in neotenic development favors expression of ability in the East Asian population earlier than the Western. We know that Western populations tend to develop more slowly, just like in the normal gradient of neotenic races.
Isn't it the other way around?
What?
Higher Newton means slower development, I think.
Right, but that doesn't mean slower cognitive development. It means, right, so higher neoteny may give you more agency earlier, but it doesn't mean that your cognitive maturity will end at the same place, right? So what we've seen in Westerners is, and I think we have, you can look at blacks, I mean, their maturity starts to kick in their 40s, where their impulse.
But also they're born almost able to walk.
Yes. So wait a minute, I'm going to get off this. So I'm going to, Martin, you're correct. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my train of thought. I'm sorry. So I would believe that East Asians are at parity, if not a few 300 and 304. I believe that Europeans, if they're selected just from the European population, will still be in they'll be 100 to 101, 102. I kind of believe the Japanese 105, 106. So that's my my confidence level there. But in general, what you want to get to is 115. And the reason is that you need some people in 90s just for society to function, but you want to have the highest number of people above the threshold of self-regulation and ability. So if you're at 115, very small number of points makes a big difference. So if you were to take Japan, for example, they have 140 million. How many people do they have?
Oh, they have less than that now. I think now they're below 100 million. I'll go on. I'll check.
Right. And if you just move the needle by a standard deviation, you start producing a lot more outliers above 140, which is what makes the competitive difference. It's the same thing with Ashkenazis. It's not Jews in particular, because Jews have 90 IQs, but the Ashkenazi are Europeanized, so they've been under bottlenecks. So and they redistribute IQ, reproduction to their rabbis. So they've produced an outlier population. So if you look at them, they produce 2 more over 140 compared to Europeans. Plus, they tend to focus on those things which express verbal utility in an era of verbal utility. So
just to circle back on the other point, the Japanese I was wrong. Japanese population is currently at 123 million. They peaked around 2010, where I thought they peaked a lot earlier. But based on projection, by 2050, they'd be at roughly 100 million. Probably by the end of the century, it's going to be less than 100 million, essentially taking them back to the 1960s levels.
Yeah, which is not a bad. I figure the U.S. population has an extra 100 million in it. That would be about right.
It's not so much how many people you have, especially since we're in a post-industrial society now. It's the quality of the people.
Correct.
As long as you're not getting replaced at the same time. And there are efforts to replace even Japanese.
Yes. Well.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I was
so
surprised by how many immigrants I saw when I was in Japan last.
All right. So we're running over your time. I'm just being
actually, I realized my meeting got canceled, so I have some more time.
Yay! All right. So that was actually really interesting. So the whole thing is, this is a difference between hard eugenics and soft eugenics. Soft eugenics is, it's a spectrum. I'm going to suppress my momentary desire to insert something offensive here, sexually offensive, humorous. If you look at hard eugenics, it means removing people from the population, right?
It's what the Allied powers have accused Germany of doing.
Yes, that's hard eugenics, right? Soft eugenics is any set of policies which simply reduce the number of offspring below replacement level for population.
It's just refusal to subsidize that reproduction.
I would
argue that or Martin says, or refuse to subsidize that production. I would argue that for the vast majority of human history, we've practiced soft eugenics one way or another.
This is correct, right? But we didn't have to take responsibility for it because people did it or starved. I mean, I always think it's funny is women are always criticizing men about their violence in war, but women have killed more children by exposure than men have in war by orders of magnitude. Because you can't afford to feed them, right? You can't afford to feed them. So, so soft eugenics is that the Americans were doing the right thing, which was sterilizing people during the progressive era, and I think that is something that would be, if you want subsidy, sterilization comes from subsidy, right? That's actually the strongest selection pressure we can have. So
just turning it into some baiting into hazard, which it could easily become.
Say again?
Just avoid turning it into some baiting into hazard.
I think you're right. Can you explain that?
That you might bait people who want with pleasure into a mistake of getting themselves.
Oh, you mean you bait people in the population that actually you want to have them have more children. You bait them into not having children.
Yeah, they have to be absolutely sure that that's the correct answer for them.
All right, so you're saying there are really two criteria. There's
it's not a decision that should be made lightly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Whereas what you're saying is one child, if you're being subsidized for one child, right? Then that's it. Is that what you're saying? Then we cut you off.
Yeah, that's the other option. That's conditioning welfare on that.
Yes. All right. So basically, there's a spectrum of hard to soft, and there's a spectrum of policies in between. I'm all in favor of doing what the Dominican Republic did to Haiti, which is just revoke passports back to the 60s, revoke citizenship back to the 60s, and send anybody that's not a contributing member of society to go home. But you have to have some sort of incredible crisis in order to pull something like that off. But that was the only thing I could think of that would fix it. The problem is then you get into who goes back. I mean, it's real easy from my perspective. Are you running a? Are you not a criminal? Is there limited criminality in your family? And are you have you created a productive family? In other words, are you self-sustaining? I don't care if people go home. Don't keep people stay if they're great. Matter of fact, one of the conversations I've had with most immigrants is that Americans generally don't care if you work as long as you work hard.
I don't think that should be enough. Certainly, if you produce a separate ethnic community, then that whole community should go.
Yeah, well, that's probably the right answer. It's just full integration. All right. I mean, because if I go in, like I know how I've been when I live in other countries, I'm like, I have a privilege to be here. I have to act like them as much as possible, right? Or not conflict with them in their ways as much as possible. And otherwise I'm privileged. What bothers?
Because if you start to push your way around, especially in terms of your culture and political ideology, that's just a form of conquest.
That's right.
And there needs to be consideration that some just need to be residents. without political power.
Hey, Martin, how's your pussy?
She seems pleased.
God, I really love you, man. I can't believe you put up with my shit. All right. Do we have more to go? Have we answered that?
I think we're good on that one. I can stay for another 15 minutes or so if we want to entertain one more question, or if we just end here.
Let me see here. That's a hard question. You think, Martin, wait on that one?
It depends on how much would you add.
Dick.
Okay, I think we should save that as the first question
for next
session, which the pattern tends to be we take the most time on the first question.
So at least we're through January now.
Yes.
What do the rest of them look like? These are great questions. That was an interesting one. Number 8 is interesting. It's short. You all know your own IQs.
I was testing IQ has dropped.
Has it?
I'm pretty sure it has dropped.
Well, that happens with age.
Martin answers here. I don't tell them. But,
I was tested by a psychologist as a kid, and he said...
Okay. Let's save that until whenever this question is actually due.
What?
We should just say, we should follow the queue. This is number 9 on the queue.
Yeah, but it's easy to answer. All right, I'll leave you alone.
And besides, only Martin put on his answer.
All right, fine. All right, I'm good. That's it. Let's call it. Let's do our thing. Is it my job or your job?
It's always been your job.
All right. So yeah, I'll still forget half of it. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. This is Friday, March 7th, 2025. It's been our it's Curt, Francis, and Martin from the Natural Law Institute. We hold these meetings every 2 weeks. Yes, is it every 2 weeks on a Friday? Where you submit your questions using a link below in the what is it called? The comment? What's
the
it?
Description.
And we put them in the queue, and we get to them when we get to them. We try to go into depth on these questions. That's Martin's way of saying that I talk too much. But we go into depth on these questions, try to completely answer them. We don't give short answers, as some people have asked us to give short answers. If you want short answers, there's plenty of people. Use a freaking Wikipedia. If you want.
I was going to say, well, you can take our answers, transcribe it, and feed it to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
They want true answers, which is why they don't go to Wikipedia.
Yes, right. Yes. Exactly. We'll try to give you true answers. So in any event, we do our best, and actually I find this pretty enjoyable. You guys, I mean, I love working with you guys on this stuff. Yes. And it's fun because you get the 3 perspectives here, which is quite useful. Anyway, love you all. Thanks very much for your participation. Send us your questions. What?
And I'm just going to finish by like, subscribe, and share.
Like, subscribe, share, because it's amazing. What we found is that people don't watch these so much because they're long, unless you're really into what we do. But we expect that when we break them into individual topics, that will change. And we have hundreds of them now, right? We have hundreds.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of them.
We have answered 232 since we started the series, almost 2 years ago now? A year and a half at least.
Right. So we've covered a lot of stuff, which is kind of interesting. It'll be fun to have them organized by topic. right? And people can do a playlist by topic and see what happens there. All right,
One
guys.
of these days, I'll get on to break them into each of the individual questions. Just that every time, the more we answer, the more that becomes a backlog.
Yes, of course. All right. Love you all. Thanks for the team here, and thanks for the audience. Really enjoy it. Have a great day.